Hello, everyone. Welcome for joining us today for our Shelter in Studio event with Cheryl Derricotte. I would like to thank you for joining us today and to let you know that we'll be continuing our series, but we'll be changing the format just a little bit. We're going to be doing from the bench of, and the series will be once a month instead of every Thursday. So stay tuned for more information on that format coming up. But let me introduce Cheryl. She's a visual artist, and her favorite mediums are glass and paper. She's originally from Washington, D.C. She lives and makes art here in San Francisco. Her art has been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, the San Francisco Chronicle, Merci SF, and the San Francisco Business Times. Cheryl is an active thought leader in the arts. She serves as the Chief Mindfulness Officer of Crux, a nationwide cooperative of predominantly Black and other underrepresented artists working at the intersection of art and technology through immersive storytelling. Cheryl is a frequent speaker about her own work and, more broadly, contemporary political art. And with further ado, let me introduce you to Cheryl. Cheryl, take it away.
Everyone, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for coming. And okay, this is going to be good because we have Cheryl squared. We have two
That's right.
Cheryls. Okay, so this is going to be a lot. Cheryl, are you also a Pisces? Are there four of us in the room? Because I'm a Pisces, so there's two of me.
No, I'm a Leo.
Okay, if you had said Gemini, that would have been like, there's still four of us. All right. Well, first, let me welcome everyone to my shelter in studio, which is my kitchen table. This is where it has all been happening through COVID. And so it's really been fascinating, as I'm sure most of you have experienced, to think about how your work has shifted and changed through the pandemic. So thank you all for taking this time. And let's see, Cheryl, how do you want to start? Do you want to throw out a question or do you want me to do the deck? Tell me what you want to do.
Okay, so why don't you tell us how your practice has changed over the last year?
So the biggest shift for me was not having access to my studio. I primarily work in warm glass. And so our studio building was closed for the majority of the shelter in place. And then even after things slowly reopened, I was still kind of hesitant to go back because I was in a shared studio. Some of you in the Bay Area may know Yosemite Place Studios. And so I was actually in a space with four other people, but there were four of us total, but still, a shared studio environment. And we were all just sort of learning how to manage COVID and that type of thing. So I was a little hesitant to go back. And so that really pushed me to do more of my other side of the practice, which is work on paper. And I can show some images so people are oriented to what we're talking about. Um, I always start my talks by letting people know that I'm a contemporary political artist. So I always say that I stand for art and liberation. And it's really important to me to make art that facilitates conversations that we otherwise probably wouldn't have if we weren't dealing with art. I think that's one of the wonderful things about art, that it allows us to engage in difficult dialogues at a pace that works for us individually. And so most people actually know me from my glass. So this is just an installation shot from my first solo show at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And I created a lot of portraits of formerly enslaved people on glass, as well as a video and some work on paper about plantation life and the economics of it all. Here's some more portraits in glass. Another theme sort of title I've worked under is Ancestral Journeys, to really start to show how people moved through the ages in the Americas after slavery. So these two images actually are of a formerly enslaved couple in New York State. And then the second image were actually grandchildren of slaves. And so a lot of the imagery I use comes from public domain collections of libraries. And, I'm really trying to place these historical photographs in our contemporary dialogues. And so just to, again, root you, this is a picture of my kiln, which I named Emerald City. About 2 years ago, I did a Kickstarter campaign and was very grateful that a number of people backed that and were incredibly patient through the pandemic to get their rewards. And this is Emerald City. And so my kiln is actually my height to give people an understanding of why it can't be in the kitchen with me. We call them coffin kilns. So the interior shelf that you're looking at is actually 42 inches long. And so this is an example of how the work really shifted for me. The image you're seeing now is one panel of a triptych. This is Thomas Jefferson, as the caption says. And next to it is actually a panel from an Instagram series that I did because I had a wonderful opportunity to do a micro residency at the French consulate in San Francisco at a place they named Villa San Francisco. And the sort of overarching themes that they gave the curator, Candace Huey, were like transdisciplinary, evolving beauty, a lot of things that had to do with the shifting of the times. And so when she reached out to me about the show, I said, gee, French consulate, I'm really getting a hit on Thomas Jefferson. And so I dived into making work on paper that dealt with his contradictory positions about freedom. My entree into it was, this is true, I didn't make this up. My mother's maiden name really was Jefferson. And so, the work shifted from these physical objects exclusively that were often in glass and paper to a narrative of storytelling through the digital space via Instagram posts, Instagram lives, and Zoom talks like the one we're having today. And so it turned out that my mother may have been right, because where my family actually came from was less than 3 hours from Monticello. So she may have been onto something. And then this second panel of the triptych really gives presence to wheat. One of the things about Jefferson is that he loved his French food, including his bread. And so he grew wheat at Monticello, among other crops. And then I really wanted to center the wolf in this work, because the wolf is such a storied, just fabled character, both in indigenous stories as well as in French stories. And so again, bringing these historical images back into our contemporary dialogues, it's not that long after we saw what happened in Charlottesville, and really just opening up the space for people to have a conversation and understand that geography. It's not so far out of the realm of imagination that we might have a major race ride a few miles from a major plantation in America. Not everything gets worked out in 100 years. So that's kind of the overview of like how the work really shifted.
I have a question for you, Cheryl.
Please.
Okay, so how tall are you? And this is for context of how tall your kiln is.
I am 5'5".
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's 5'5" by 42 inches wide?
So no, the kiln itself is, the length of the kiln is close to my height, and the interior, so it's a width. The width of the kiln. If I laid down next to the kiln, we'd be almost the same length. And that's why they're called coffin kilns. Not
Okay.
that I'm going to climb in, but that's exactly where that comes from, because you could lay down in the kiln if you wanted to.
Um, so I was just going to ask you this question, but there is a question for you in the chat.
Yes,
Margarita is wondering if you can describe your process for the glass work, but also for
sure.
the work on paper that you're doing now. What kinds of materials and how are they treated?
Okay, great. So my glass work is what is considered warm glass. That's how kiln work is framed. The short, sort of overview to orient people to glass is that we talk about glass as cold, warm, or hot. Cold actually means up to about 1200 degrees, which is funny, I know. But old school stained glass was just sheets of glass that people cut cold. And over the years, that evolved into some low firing techniques, which is 1200 degrees. My work is considered warm glass because it solidly sits in 12 to 1600 degrees. The highest I fire usually is 1550 degrees. Um, the actual sort of technique that I favor is work with powders. So everything you see is actually glass. That's not ink on glass. That's not paint on glass. It's powdered glass that when it is fired in the kiln gives you a consistent glass image. So for people that have ever done any type of screen printing, I do use screens in my work, and that's the vehicle to then put the imagery onto the glass, depending on what size powdered glass I use. With the work on paper, I tend to use a lot of obviously archival paper. The gallery, I should say, I'm a museum artist. The museum and the gallery want you with the archival paper. So I use a lot of archival 100% cotton rag paper. I also sometimes, so these G clay prints, these digital collages like Thomas Jefferson that you're seeing, that work is on 100% cotton rag. When I did the work for Moed, I actually purposely used a Fabriano for those prints, and those were like hand pulled monoprints because, again, it was a commentary on slavery in the diaspora. So I wanted to get Italy in there, and make sure that the whole show was hanging together from a diasporal standpoint.
Well, great. So Mary has a question. She's wondering if you can tell us your path to work with glass and ceramics. Did you study it in school?
So no, it was the most circuitous thing ever. Thank you for the question. I had a wonderful single mother that could not understand why she had an activist and an artist for a daughter. And then later in life, I learned that, she just happened to meet my father, who was also a musician in band. Okay. And they have both been musicians. And so, my grandmother told me stories of how she used to get so mad at my mother for taking me to marches and all these things during the civil rights movement and the early women's movement in support of like welfare mothers. But no, she didn't know how she got an artist and an activist. And so, like most creative people, I got a day job, but then eventually found my way back to art. And so I was taking some classes after work in Washington, D.C. At the Corcoran School of Art and Design. So I did first a certificate in ceramics and sculpture. And then by that point, a glass shop had opened, the Washington Glass School, founded by Tim Tate and Erwin Timmers and Michael Janis. And I was like, still in love with art and also just way too type A and arrogant, and said, if I can make a clay bowl, I can make a glass bowl. And little did I know that glass bowl was going to challenge me. And I was going to fall madly in love with glass. And so the next workshop that I took at Washington Glass School was actually a lighted sculpture course. It was about glass as a sculptural medium. And I made a piece that was called Shed Some Light, and it was in the shape of a shack. It was a mixed media glass piece. And that artwork actually got written up twice in the Washington Post through the school doing shows and exhibiting our work. And at that point, Tim, who was the side of the house at Washington Glass, who was really a glass artist, said, I think you might have a future. Maybe you should settle down. And so, 20 years later, I'm still settling down with glass.
That's awesome. Another question, is the Monticello triptych mixed media?
It is not. It is a digital collage, strictly, print. That work actually, just so people know, each of the panels is 11 by 14. And that work is in an edition of 6, one for each of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings' children. And at this point, let's see, I don't know if my gallery is actually on, one of my galleries is on the call, but Candace Huey from Riddle can help you if you are interested in acquiring that work, because we do still have a few in the series of 6 that aren't spoken for yet.
Great. So, and what were your thought processes during the pandemic, when you were trying to figure out, I need to make stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest thought process for me was, how can I retain my voice through these mediums that are very different for me? And so, I would say traditionally in the work I make, Photoshop might be 10 to 20% of what's happening. It's just a vehicle to clean up historic images and get them onto screens, because the real game is the glass or, the monoprint. And then in this case, it was like, wow, the computer is now the whole game. So how do I retain my voice as someone interested in history, as someone interested in politics, as someone interested in fueling dialogue and sharing stories through this, this computer thing that we're looking at. And so actually, let me go to the next set of images. One of the things early on in the pandemic that I did was take a course at San Francisco Center for the Book with Kate Laster on mail art. And so, not knowing it at the time, but this mail art opened up for me what became a fine art series, again, of collages, which I'll show you, called Pandemic Bookkeeping. And so here you see the little postcards that I made, and it was really the genesis of this idea of, how am I keeping track of time? I'm seeing a lot of artists keeping like these journals and they're counting. I was just very struck by how much everyone was counting. And the New York Times was doing a series. They were running the series of artists and their journals during the pandemic. And so for me, this sort of was my entree into what my pandemic journal may look like. And I just started counting things in my house, the plants and how many, the Zooms, oh my gosh, Zooms were ever increasing during that time. And so it turned into this. And so this is a suite of 4 digital collages that marries 2 different sets of historic images. The background journal image is journal pages from Clara Barton, who actually was a revered Civil War nurse and also the founder of what we now call the American Red Cross. And they're juxtaposed with images from this other famous woman, Isabella Beaton, who actually published in the 1800s a handbook on how to run the modern household. And so for me, I began to see that, like, really I was getting judged as a woman by these two standards. On the one hand, I was supposed to like be, you know, I think I described it in the artist statement that I wrote. I'm supposed to be this understated beauty with a perfectly appointed household, while at the same time, you know, I'm this career woman advancing society like Clara Barton. And all of this is in the backdrop of, you know, in our case, the pandemic. I love the timing of these two women's lives, you know, because I felt like in many cases in 2020, I woke up in a Dickens novel in the middle of the Civil War. So they really spoke to me as a way to encapsulate the time. And I think people can kind of see how I went from that mail art idea to these images. That's a good way to see sort of how my brain works artistically.
We have a statement and a question.
Yes.
Margarita says, seems like Cheryl's media are chosen very deliberately for their symbolic value in and of themselves, in addition to the images she creates. Does she include artist statements along with her pieces usually, or do they stand on their own?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do include artist statements. So I write no more than a page to go with actual works. And I do that because a lot of times, just like the conversations we're having here, people are kind of interested in like, well, where did that come from? Or how did you get to, you know, that particular idea? Um, Also, you know, I think that this work could stand on its own. All of my work could stand on its own, but I use the artist statement just as a way to sort of say, this is what I was thinking about when I made the work, but I remain open to whatever, you know, other interpretations you may see in the work as the viewer.
Great. Helen says she joined a few minutes late, and she wants to know about the pattern background of the Jefferson triptych replica wallpaper. Is it from Monticello?
No, it's not. And so I actually, again, found a historic wallpaper in the public domain that I could use. And I replaced the center flower that was in the historic wallpaper with the wheat. So again, that was a deliberate choice on my part to create a wallpaper or background motif that was in line with sort of sharing this story about Thomas Jefferson and how he grew wheat at Monticello.
Great. So, what are you looking forward to? Um,
Yeah, well, I am looking forward to the big thing I'm looking forward to, which some people may say, why? But I'm looking forward to moving because I just got a new studio space. I'm moving into Islas Creek, which is still in the Bayview. It's like in between Dogpatch and Bayview. And it's going to be amazing because, as you can imagine, when I got my kiln, suddenly the size of my studio shrank. So I have been in 112 square feet in Yosemite Place Studios, and now I'm going to have 520 square feet in Islas Creek. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a lot of room to spread out and make more work. Which is always great because part of having a larger kiln is wanting to scale up my work. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. We have another question. Marguerite's wondering, what are your go-to sources for public domain historic images? She says the ones you've chosen are fabulous.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really use the library. So I have sourced images from our local library. Oakland has a number of images in the public domain. The New York Public Library has a number of images in the public domain. Also, the British Library, when I first did my show at Moed like 5 years ago, they had just put a whale. I mean, like 1 million images into the public domain. So I mean, really, library collections are my go-to. Oh, and of course, Library of Congress. They have some images in the public domain as well.
Well, thanks for that. You want to tell us a little bit about the image that you have on the screen right now, living on the
Yeah.
fence line?
Yes. Well, when we talk about bigger space and making bigger work, you know, in a bigger studio, this is actually my first large scale public art. This billboard was up for the month of February as part of a show called Whistling in the Dark, sponsored by a nonprofit called Save Art Space. And so the call was for artists to develop work along environmental themes. And so this is actually one of my own photographs of the Richmond refinery paired with an NAACP quote that talks about the fact that there are 6.7 million Black people that actually live in the 91 US counties with an oil refinery. Hence the title, Living on the Fence Line, because these are people literally living on the fence line of industrial uses. And so it was like, really exciting to finally, you know, make a big public art piece. And then it was just they picked where the locations were going to be, and because of the pandemic, I was not able to travel to LA, but I had a number of friends that went to see it, and they told me I was very near like Vincent Price's star, Richard Pryor's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So I was really excited about that too.
Great. So let's see. Helen says she's been to Monticello, but it's been too long ago to remember the wallpaper. She says what you use seemed to be appropriate to the period, though. Um, Margarita says she's a librarian, so she's happy to hear that you use public library resources. And we have another question. Kristen says, have you collaborated much with other artists on projects in the past, or have plans to do so in the future? Or do you just prefer to work alone?
So let's see. I'd probably say it's, you know, no, yes, and yes. I mean, you know, no, I haven't collaborated a lot with other artists. I will say the collaborations I've done, I've enjoyed greatly. There was a, a ceramicist and poet that used to live in the Bay Area, MG Roberts, and we collaborated on a poem and a print together, which I really enjoyed. And it was published in Art Practical, which unfortunately is no longer a publication in the Bay Area, but that was a great collaboration a few years ago. Also, let's see, I actually, and people in the Bay Area will know this story, but I was on the short list for the Maya Angelou sculpture, and I had actually bid as a collaborator with a gentleman named Dean Allison, who is an amazing glass sculptor. And so that was going to be, you know, a collaborative artwork, and we certainly had to like collaborate to figure out how to do the proposal for that work. So, it, you know, I'm open to it if it's something that is the right thing, you know, or a good fit. But I can't say I've done it a lot, you know, and I do enjoy like the making up the ideas part, you know. I think in that sense, I'm kind of a classic artist in that I love, love, love the creation part of it all and sort of figuring out the ideas. I think if, you know, there's a theme I could pull out for you about my work, if it's not obvious, it's the relationship of text and image. Everything I do is about text and image. The title is often, I always say I live under the tyranny of title. You know, I'll have the title or a phrase before I've made the work, either in glass or paper. So, you know, I know not everyone works that way. And I think that's part of the reason that the collaboration that I did with MG was really successful, because as a poet, she gets the importance of text.
That's awesome. So we have 1 minute left. Can you let everybody know how to get a hold of you or where they can see more of your work?
Yes, and boom, there it is on the screen. That's where my website is. There's also, if you want to sign up for my email list, it's just CherylDerricotteStudio.com/connect. I didn't put that on there, but just add a /connect to get on the email list. And, in less than a minute, I just want to say thanks so much to Cheryl B. and to Jeff and Chad and Sarah and Meryl and everyone at the Center for the Book. This has been so much fun. And I really enjoy both workshops at the center as well as I've gotten more involved personally as a volunteer on the center strategic planning committee. So I just want to encourage everyone on this call, keep taking workshops, keep making donations to the best of your ability, because we all want the Center for the Book to be here another 25 years. It's an awesome place.
And with that, we check us out on Friday. We have our 25th anniversary Blue Moon Speaker Series with Eric Speakerman. We will see you guys all soon. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.